Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new-ish album from Celldweller that came out earlier this year, but I'm catching up on it. It's called Offworld. Celldweller is the main project of a man simply known as Klayton, also known as Scandroid, Circle of Dust, FreakGen, and a few other aliases here and there. Some people may remember fairly recently I reviewed the Scandroid album Monochrome and got my first taste of what this guy had to offer. While I'll admit I wasn't precisely blown away by what I heard, I will say I did like what I heard. I made an unofficial compilation for my iPod of my favorite tracks from the two Scandroid albums, and I'll admit, while I'm not sure about either of those two albums in their entirety, I have returned to those tracks I actually kept more than I thought I would. But I also hinted in that review that I wanted to review the most recent mainline Celldweller album at some point later on, if for nothing else than for the In Brief segment in which I catch myself up on all the Clayton that I missed. I have had a couple of people bugging me to check this guy out, so I figured I may as well finally go through all his stuff, so here's my thoughts on his discography so far. This album gets a ton of hype, presumably from people who typically listen to heavier music than I do, and I'm not 100% sure if I'm sold on it yet. It's pretty bloated and samey to me, a lot of it runs together. But I feel like there's something here. I do like the mix of metal with techno and drum and bass and the like, and there are certain tracks that have really good hooks. I can see this maybe growing on me with repeat listens. Right now, though, it's fine. Whoa, okay, that got my attention. I mean, it does have the similar problem of being samey and overly long, but it well makes up for it with much better production, better grooves, better hooks, just a really fun, engaging release all the way through. I was hoping it would have a little bit more of a brain, but I still really like this one regardless. Also, by the way, I checked out the continuous mix version from the deluxe edition. I'm presuming they're not that different, but yeah, I always go for the continuous mix. Also worth noting that Wish Upon a Black Star ended up having a novel based off of it, and Klayton made this companion score to it. Well, okay, you can't really make a proper score to a novel, but I do very much appreciate Klayton genuinely putting forth the effort to make it sound like one. I mean, sure, there are a lot of moments where it just sounds like a glorified Scandroid album, but he does actually try to get experimental and ambient and weird, and I like that. I kind of wish the album proper had more of this kind of stuff, but oh well. This album is an even further improvement from Wish Upon a Black Star. No continuous mix that I could find, unfortunately, but it has much better variety and didn't feel nearly as padded out. Though still entirely keeping the genre-bending and pure mindless fun appeal, and even more epic thanks to the cool science fiction concepts. Really only have one minor issue, and it's that "I have a heart on for you" is such a fuck you terrible line that I had to mention it right here. He even based the entire track on it, dude. That's basically it, though. There's more than enough here to make up for that one bad lyric. I mean, the whole thing reminds me of Coma Duster, actually. It's become abundantly clear, by the way, that Klayton is like a giant inspiration on that guy after hearing this. Check out Coma Duster if you haven't already. This is a series of mostly instrumental albums made for soundtrack licensing for TV and video games and the like. Basically a bunch of his kind of trailer music. The first and third volumes are pretty cool, I guess, though I like the second one a fair bit more. Also wanted to touch on these real quick. This is a series of 4 more mostly instrumentals, currently released under the name FreakGen, though initially released as Celldweller, so I guess it counts for this segment enough. Here though, he's not so much doing trailer music as he is just messing around with electronic music, making tracks weirder, more experimental, more fleshed out, involving elements of ambient music and IDM. You know, making the kind of stuff I am most likely to be drawn to. Kinda BT-ish actually, but much darker than anything he typically does. It's nothing that precisely blew me away. Most of it admittedly blends into the background for me, but I did very much enjoy all 4 of these. Also just noticed that the 4th volume also came out after the album I'm about to actually review, but oh well. Good stuff. Which brings us to here. That's a lot of Klayton I went through there. One guy warned me, "Oh, Scandroid's really different from normal Celldweller." Kinda true, but not that different, really. Guy's still really good at hooks, really great producer, you can tell very obviously that they're the same guy. Just that as Celldweller, he's not relying purely on 80s nostalgia, synthwave production, and doing a lot more interesting genre-bending kind of stuff. By the way, sorry, I couldn't be arsed to check out anything from Circle of Dust since it seems to be more of a metal outfit and I didn't really want to bother with that. If there's anything from that project that people think I might find interesting, they can yell at me in the comments. I know people will, but yeah, I've never been much of a metal industrial guy, so I just skipped those. Anyway, going into this new album, I had a little bit of an idea on what to expect, mainly in that I've been getting some very mixed reactions to this thing from fans and others. Seems with this album, Klayton made a massive heel turn in sound, and it appears to have really pissed some people off. Honestly though, hearing about that more excited me than it worried me. I mean, I've always preferred artists I like trying new things and pushing themselves rather than sticking to tried and true formulas. In basically any context. It was a little weirder that Clayton kind of came out with this out of nowhere. Well, I mean, I don't follow the guy myself, so I don't know how out of nowhere it really was, but from what I've read, this guy loves to take his sweet time releasing new albums. Like, Wish Upon a Black Star was dragged out in production hell for like 8 straight years. In one breath, Jesus Christ, 8 years to work on and release an album? Like, even Hybrid aren't that bad. I mean, they're about to hit the 8-year gap between albums in a few months, but hopefully we don't get to that point. But I digress. The point was that Offworld was announced in 2017, and then released in 2017. By Clayton standards, that is really freaking fast. Like a side project and not a mainline album. And to be honest, after hearing the album, that is probably my single biggest problem with it. It does not do a particularly great job of justifying itself as a mainline Celldweller album. But by the same token, I can't really think of any of his existing side projects where this would fit well. Certainly not Scandroid or Freak Gen. I think what he should have done is just release it as Klayton. It would have given this album that much more personal weight, and put it on the Celldweller Bandcamp anyways, because close enough, I guess. But I don't know. So let's talk about what Offworld actually has to offer on its own merits. Basically, this is an emo album. Not Eno, as in Brian Eno, no, emo with an M. Offworld is almost entirely stripped-back, guitar-driven ballads. There's some vague electronic elements in there, but it is one of those kinds of albums that I would absolutely not be covering if it weren't for the fact that I wanted to do that Clayton in brief segment and all the other stuff I listen from the guy is definitely electronic. Kind of a disappointing endpoint for this video, to be honest, but oh well. Another thing about this album is that there's a lot of tracks that are straight lifted from other Clayton projects. Awakening with You is from the self-titled Scandroid album. Into the Fall is apparently a mashup of the Circle of Dust tracks, Embracing Entropy and Malacandra. And there's a cover of The Call's Too Many Tears. Combine that with the fact that the album ends in a reprise-ish of the first track and a remix of Awakening with You. That's 6.5 out of 11 tracks that are actually original exclusives to this album. I don't know how well this justifies itself as its own thing, is what I'm saying. And it kinda bothers me because aside from that, I don't think this album does anything wrong. For what it is, it's good. I mean, I don't know if I'm really the right person to talk about this album since I do not listen to this kind of music at all. I mean, I don't listen to any of those kinds of artists like, I don't know, with some good examples. My Chemical Romance? My Bloody Valentine? Muse? I have no idea if those are even the right comparisons to be making. Actually, probably not Muse, to be honest. And I might just be completely mixing those first two up because their names sound similar and only one of them is actually a valid comparison, but oh well. Or Radiohead maybe might be a good comparison. I mean, I still got all their stuff lying in a folder on my computer waiting to be listened to, and all I've heard so far is Kid A once a couple of years ago. Gotta get on that at some point. I don't know. So I guess Offworld is somewhere in that area. Out of my comfort zone for sure. Probably more something in John from ARTV's lane. Maybe, I don't know. But like I said, despite its being so fundamentally different from basically all of Clayton's other stuff, I did enjoy it. Maybe because I have slowly been losing my own grip on sanity over this past year for obvious reasons. And I'm sure I'm far from the only one. 2017 is a great time to hate yourself. As for Klayton himself, I feel like I'd heard somewhere that he was going through some form of depression and channeled that into his album. At least I don't remember where I read that. It might just be a rumor for all I know, and he's perfectly fine. Like he said, he was in an interview that he was just inspired by the winter and how he tends to listen to more emotive and melancholy music during that time of the year. But he did make me believe that something was wrong with this album. Between the lyrics and the presentation and the sound, he did legitimately come off as depressed here. I will definitely have to give it credit for that. The emotion in every track definitely comes across. And his production, despite being applied to a completely different sound and is so much more stripped back, is as on point as it always has been. I actually wasn't keen on it, but it did grow on me with repeat listens. It appears very thin and bleak at first, but once I settled into its mood, I was able to appreciate it better. Now, as far as individual tracks go, there's admittedly not a ton to talk about, since all these tracks are very similar. They're all going for that same kind of mood. All very atmospheric, a lot of electric and acoustic guitars, sometimes with Klayton's voice being put through a very lo-fi and distorted filter, especially on Into the Fallen Echoes. Klayton's singing is usually pretty good, but I'm not huge on his voice on the latter track in particular. It's suddenly kind of falsetto-y there, and he comes off kind of whiny. Took away from the effect a little for me, but whatever. There are other tracks where he sounds great, like The Great Divide is a pretty similar track to that, but he sings in a more normal voice, and the atmosphere does most of the work. It all comes together well. I did typically like the tracks which had a little more energy than the others. Too Many Tears was a good example. Moved a little faster than the other ones, and the less repetitive lyrics allowed it to stand out more despite them, not being his. The title track and Own Little World do have this slow-building, brooding epicness to them. I really like the pianos on them, which help accent the emotion and help make them stand out. And I also have to give special mention to Last Night on Earth, which had Klayton's vocals mostly, modulated, maybe auto-tuned to cement that sterile feel. Not sure. Klayton does use this effect on the track Mother's Arms as well, though that one's basically just an interlude. Reminds me more of the New Machine transitions from Pink Floyd's A Momentary Lapse of Reason. But Last Night on Earth executes it better, and also pairs it up with some more electronic production to help it stand out more. Just overall one of the most powerful tracks on this whole thing. Probably my second favorite track on here. But as much as I hate to say it though, my favorite track on the album overall, perhaps unfortunately, was not one of Klayton's regular tracks, but rather the Ulrich Schnauss remix of Awakening with You tacked on at the end. Seeing Ulrich Schnauss, of all people, on this album convinced me to hold on to that remix, and was one of the things that made me more excited for this album. He was such an unusual choice for a remixer, and I figures there was no way this album could be that bad if he was on it. Maybe kind of disappointing that his remix was my favorite part of the album, but he does combine the darker nature of the Awakening with You cover and makes it more of his own thing, combining it with his brighter and sunnier but still heavy stylings. If you heard that surprise album he dropped at the end of last year, you know what I'm talking about. It meshes super well. I loved it. But it is maybe kind of telling that my favorite track on this album was a remix. The thing about Offworld is that I feel like if you stuck any of these tracks in the middle of another Celldweller album, especially those first two since they were so samey, they would really stand out and help give those albums more variety and gravitas. But gathering them all together in one place, at least for me, kinda weakens their impact. What you got here is an album that is very dependent on its mood and calls for you to kind of already be in the mood for something of that nature to get that full effect. And like other albums that require me to be in that certain kind of mood, I don't see this getting much replay value in the future. I can see its place, but it doesn't fill a void for me personally. There are other, depressing albums like this that play much more to my personal tastes than this one does. But all that said, I am glad I sat down with it. Is it anything super special? Not really. Though it is definitely special in the context of Klayton's career. Like, it looks like from what I see that this album was called Offworld Volume 1 at one point, so it looks like he's not going to be making anything else like this, and honestly that's probably for the best. First of all, because I don't think he had a ton of ideas saved for this anyway, but it works best as this once-off anomaly in his catalog. Having nothing else sound like it gives it the extra novelty to make it stand out, you know? But for what it's worth, even if a bit disposable for me, Clayton does do a good job of crafting atmosphere and conveying emotion here. It works in the way it's supposed to, so I guess I'll give it a pass. I'm overall feeling a solid 7 out of 10, I think. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments and comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.